So let's talk about some different textures, both additive and subtractive, that you can try on your gargoyle or any project for that matter. So here I'm doing some additive textures where I'm scoring and slipping tiny coils or little noodles of clay onto the surface right next to each other, and then using my blue detail brush to brush some water over top of those coils in the same direction as the coils, and it creates a little tiny bit of slip in between each one of them and makes them look more like a uniform texture instead of individual coils. And I keep doing that. You can do different sized coils, so alternate thin and thick ones, or you can create them all the same or just have kind of a variation. They can be completely straight or wiggly, totally up to you. And here's what they look like up close. Another example of additive texture would be just using a different shaped piece of clay and repeating that over and over again. So in this example here, I'm going to create kind of a reptilian, kind of a bumpy texture by rolling balls of clay and placing them down on my scored and slipped surface like that. And I'm going to repeat that over and over again. I'm flattening them a little bit each time. You can use balls of clay that are exactly the same size if you want it to be a little bit more uniform, or here I'm adding all different sizes and flattening them down and repeating that over and over again. Notice that I've scored the surface of my clay and then applied some slip, and then I'm pressing these down over top, and then right here I'm brushing water over the surface. So that's going to create the effect that they're a uniform texture and not individual balls of clay. If you don't brush over the top of them with water, they're going to look like individual pieces, and we want more of an overall scaly or lumpy texture. So the brush just helps fill in between with just a tiniest little bit of really thin slip, which you can see here. Another option for a different type of texture is just to simply change the shape of the item piece that you're attaching. So here I'm rolling coils, little noodles of clay, scoring and slipping those onto the surface, kind of going in the same direction to create a tuft of hair or a hunk of hair that's like raised off of the surface. So if you're looking for a texture like around the head or around the ears, or even the paws of something, this is really good because you can kind of build it up and make the fur look thick. So you see I placed my 3 little chunks there, and then I'm going to kind of slip over them or blend them together. So I want them to look like the same chunk that kind of comes to like points at the end, almost like little chunks of fur together. So I'm kind of smoothing this out. Just using the back of my dentist tool there. And then I'm going to flip the dentist tool over, so hook side down, so almost like a fingernail. And I'm going to kind of put some texture into that added piece on the surface. So there I scored first with a serrated rib to give an overall texture, and now I'm doing shorter and deeper lines to create varying marks in my clay so that it doesn't look so uniform. So in the same way that I layered carved lines on top of those coils in order to create kind of tufts of fur, you can also layer different techniques on top of each other to create a more advanced and more complex looking texture. So if I go back to those kind of reptile, like bumpy texture I created earlier and added little tiny pencil dots to the top, it creates a more complex texture that now kind of looks a little bit more like coral. And last but not least, kind of the sibling to subtractive texture is something we call impression, and that's using a tool to press into the surface repeatedly and create a new pattern or texture. So as you can see here, I'm taking the pointy end of my modeling tool and I'm pressing it repeatedly kind of in rows to create more of a scales texture. Notice how each new row of scales is lined up exactly between the previous row, which you can see close here. So the point of the new scale that I'm making lands right between the previous two. Another subtractive method similar to scales that you can do is using your round or square end of your loop tool and creating even marks by removing the clay real close together, so there's really no space in between the marks, and that can create an overall texture, or creating longer lines with the end of the loop tool that creates an overall texture.